Sophie's the worst, according to Omid Scobie. And she's the worst because she didn't know who Oprah was. So you can see she doesn't care about black people. What? But I think the other thing that is really disingenuous about this is that even in the Harry and Meghan documentary, Harry also was unimpressed by Oprah initially. Because he's like, yeah, you were really interested in Oprah, Meghan. You were really excited about that. I mean, I don't know if many of the rest of us really cared when she showed up at Kensington Palace wanting to have an interview, but you really cared. And Meghan's like, yeah, well, it's Oprah. You know, so even between the two of them, there was a real delineation between who thought Oprah was all that interesting or important. For Meghan, an American, and having grown up in Oprah's, generation of power, she saw that as a real compliment. For Harry, what did he care? It wasn't that big of a deal to him. And of course, he goes on to feign interest as it goes on, realizing that in America, it's a big deal to be interviewed by Oprah. At least it used to be. But for Omid Scobie to really throw Sophie under the bus for not caring who Oprah is or not necessarily knowing who that is that a big deal? Hello, how are you? Welcome to my channel. My name is Cheer Denise, and today we're going to be reading chapters 1 and 2 from Omid Scobie's Endgame. This book is so devoid of anything new that we're really just going to be going through this quickly. Like, this is not one of those books where we want to sit and really, drink in each chapter, because there's not much to drink here. It's a dirty puddle. Chapter 1 that we're going to cover today is not too offensive. He's talking about the Queen. So he has some reserve for her, and he is generous to her, and he's not going to find fault with her, knowing that it would make him even more unpopular than he already is. There isn't anybody out there to give him the green light to talk ugly about Queen Elizabeth, so he hasn't done it. One of the things that's really annoying to me is that he started this book out by saying that he was really going to blow the lid off of the royal family, that he was going to expose the fact that they are in their end game, and that this was going to be the book to do it. But how can it be when he's not saying anything original? Even if he wanted to ride that third rail and really say some crazy things, I could almost accept that more than him regurgitating what any of us could have realized just from reading other royal publications. Any one of us could have written this book. We would have done a better job. But no, he's not revealing anything. Not one thing has he revealed that it's like, oh, really? Wow, that's a word. You really must have a source. I've never heard it put that way. I'm seeing what you're saying. He could literally have written this book by just being somebody who read the Daily Mail every day and never missing any coverage from Sky News. He could have written the same book. So it's just annoying to me that he wants to tell you he had the inside track. You didn't. So that's what I'm saying. We're going to cover 50 pages today, like this. All right. Because we're not going to get mired down in his stupidity. We're going to spend a little bit more time in chapter 2, because that's where he's really trying to paint for you the reality of the situation. And he calls that chapter Shaky Ground. But the first chapter is called The Queen and Her Piper. So he's not being wild in this chapter. He's not saying anything that is terrible. He's got to set up for the fact that his whole point is, now that Queen Elizabeth has passed, the rest of her family just doesn't have what it takes to make this work. Not Charles, not William. Nobody has what it takes. So it's only a matter of time. But he starts the chapter out by saying, on the morning of September 6, 2022, Pipe Major Paul Burns fired up his bagpipes at 9 o'clock a.m. to wake the Queen, as he always did. Of course, she had been awake since 7:30, but for 70 years of her life, it had always been the official start to her day after having a bath and breakfast, and a moment she always looked forward to. Though his 15-minute piping session usually started promptly on the hour, those in charge asked him to commence his tune 30 minutes later on this foggy autumn morning due to the Queen's ailing health and need for rest. Major Burns' piping prefaced a busy and important day of engagements for the monarch. At the time, of course, no one knew that the piping session also heralded the Queen's final day of royal duties. So on that day, she had to meet Boris Johnson. Says that the meeting lasted 40 minutes, with Johnson later sharing that the Queen appeared bright and focused. Professional, too, though the monarch privately disliked Johnson because of his behavior. He was the only prime minister who had to apologize to her twice, but you wouldn't have known it during their time together. At noon, she met with the newly elected party leader, Liz Truss, to officially grant her permission to form a new government. The Queen had always conducted this ceremony known as the Kissing of Hands at Buckingham Palace, but due to her ongoing health struggles and her official stamped episodic mobility issues, from which she continued to suffer, palace officials decided that Truss should make the trip to the Highland estate instead. Courtiers suggested to the monarch that she might be better off letting Prince Charles carry out the task in her place. After all, the heir had already stood in for his mother at the opening of Parliament 4 months earlier. But this was one duty the Queen, despite her crippling pain that she was experiencing in private, would not step aside from. "It's my job," she said defiantly. Her meeting with Truss was short, lasting a little under an hour, and the Queen concluded it by allowing a photograph of the two to be released, the monarch with her walking stick in hand and a room-lighting smile. Truss looked somewhat out of her element, which proved to be the case, her time as PM lasting a mere 7 weeks. After carrying out light reading and correspondence from her desk, the Queen returned to her bedroom after lunch. 2 days later, Major Burns piped the Queen awake for what would be the last time. Nothing to be offended by here. I mean, I think his little, side jabs here and there at Liz Truss and Boris Johnson are equal to something that anybody would say. Boris Johnson had a checkered track record, and, if his only crime was the fact that he could never find a comb, that's a big enough issue for me. And then Liz Truss, what can we say about the woman who only lasted 7 weeks? So I'm not opposed to him having his little say here and there. But what you'll find with Scobie is the fact that in the next couple of chapters, he has this really annoying thing of never being able to miss an episode of degrading somebody. So even when he compliments them, he's got this backhand that comes in after it. He'll say, "It was really good that they did that. They never did it again." So it was kind of a one-off, but yeah, I guess it was good they did that. That is his whole tone. So you don't get much of that in this chapter. In the next chapter, it's dripping with disdain. He continues to talk about the fact that the Queen had a generosity of spirit that she showed to everybody, and he gives an example of the way she loved her piper, and who she called Pipes. All her pipers ended up with the nickname of Pipes. And she had a particular affection for Scott Methven, who piped for the Queen from 2015 till 2019, enjoying a particularly warm relationship. The Queen demonstrated her genuine kindness to him when his wife, Morven, was diagnosed with cancer. He was at a loss as to what to do after discovering the tragic news, not wanting to let down the Queen and skip his playing session that evening. But the boss was having none of it. "No," the Queen told him that afternoon. "You are not playing. You're going to go to the hospital now and sit with your wife." "She treats everyone with the utmost respect," he said, adding that when he took time off to be with his wife during her chemotherapy treatments, the British Army wanted to install a new pipe major who didn't have family matters to attend to. But once again, the Queen had his back. "I've got one Queen's piper. And the reason he isn't here is that he's caring for his wife," she told her staff. "So you're not replacing him under any circumstances. He's not getting removed from his post because his wife is dying of cancer." Yeah, I mean, what kind of a monster would snag his job from him just because he's already having one tragedy? But there are people who would have done it or would have said, "Oh, it doesn't really matter." But she had a personal relationship with him. He wasn't just this person who happened to appear in her life morning and evening. The pipers to the sovereign do more than just pipe in the morning and night, though. They also sometimes play when guests arrive at Buckingham Palace. Prince Harry did not necessarily care for the pipers. He is quoted as having called the instrument a drunken octopus, and that sometimes the bagpipes would drive him mad. They did a sound job of it then. He goes on to talk about Balmoral, and what it has meant to the family these many years. He wants to introduce us to Angela Kelly, who I'm sure he'll have a multitude of things to say as the pages go on. He catalogs the people who were with the Queen when she was in Balmoral in her last days. That would be her long-serving page of the backstairs, Paul Wybrew, and her sergeant-in-arms, Barry Mitford. They sometimes watch TV with her at night. But then, of course, there was Angela Kelly. This is her personal assistant and advisor and curator. Angela is a fashion designer and, according to most, a stern woman. Kelly was very protective of the Queen. She even lived with the monarch during her February 2022 bout with COVID, doing everything including reading to her at night and washing her hair. She was one of the Queen's most trusted aides and confidants, and a source said she was indispensable during Her Majesty's final weeks. You'll also recall that Harry and Meghan hate Angela Kelly because they say she stood in their way of getting the tiara that Meghan wanted for her wedding. So is it any surprise that Omid would want to run in and be like, a lot of people say she's real stern. A lot of people don't like her. A lot of people say she's real protective. I think what you'd call that is she's wrestling for power. Regardless, who really cares what Omid Scobie thinks about Angela Kelly? He's only just jealous because she's sitting next to power and he isn't. After he's finished talking about her final days, he moves on to the Queen's passing. So he says the Queen passed away peacefully at 3:10 p.m. in her bedroom. The official cause of death, later given to Her Majesty's official apothecary in Scotland, Dr. Douglas James Allen Glass, was of old age. Her eldest children, Princess Anne, who was in Scotland for royal engagements at the time, and Prince Charles stayed less than 10 miles away at his Birkhall residence, each receiving calls from Dr. Glass to tell them that the time had come. Anne spent the night at Balmoral Castle with her mother, and both children got to spend time at her bedside before she passed. It was what she wanted and what we all prayed for, a close friend of the family shared, to have her loved ones close by and for that moment to happen in private. Prince Andrew, Prince William, Prince Edward, and Sophie, still then the Countess of Wessex, arrived at Aberdeen Airport on a private flight just before 4:00 p.m. that day. Prince Harry, already in Britain with Meghan for non-royal engagements, landed almost 3 hours later on a separate flight. A story in itself that I'll get to later. Don't worry. I'll let you know how they were sinned against in detail. He says that night the group was split in two, with Charles, now king, and Camilla, queen consort, leaving for Birkhall with William, now next in line, for a dinner together. A top of the hierarchy gathering of sorts. Meanwhile, Andrew, Edward, Sophie, Anne, and Harry sat down for dinner together at Balmoral. Major Burns, dressed in a Balmoral tartan, played the pipes in honor of the Queen before they ate. As he stood outside the residence dining room, it was the first time Burns had played for the guests without the presence of the, quote, boss. I just want to say that his need to delineate the two groups, Charles and William going off and having dinner, while the rest of the family sort of sat and picked at their meal, sadly, at Balmoral. What's that about? Well, I'll tell you what that's about. Charles is now king, and his son is next in line. Why are they acting like this is anything that we can relate this to? I've said the same thing with Meghan, who is continually confounded by the way the royal family works. Completely unable to disengage in her mind the fact that this family has duties that she will not be able to relate to any of our other experiences. If the Queen has passed away, of course her son, who is now king, is going to have to go and consider now what life will be. There are things to take care of. There are plans to be made. And his son, who's going to follow right after, now has a new category of responsibilities that he has to be in charge of. Everybody else there, nothing really changes for them. So it's not that weird that William and Charles would need to go, and I wouldn't even say it's not secluding themselves, but just go and, all right, now things have happened. All the things we've been planning for have happened. Okay, so let's start rolling out the, next steps. So this isn't like when your grandma died, if there was some clique in the family and these people go over here and you go over here and never the twain shall meet and you just have to be this sad sack by yourself. Well, the, more favored members of the family grieved separately and you have to grieve by yourself. That's not what's happening here. So why waste breath to paint a picture like that? Okay, well, he spends a good deal of time talking about her journey back to London. He discusses how long the queue was to see her and that it could be seen from planes flying into Heathrow. So long was the line to pay one's respects. He discusses the funeral and where her body was laid. And he does go out of his way to make this point, which I appreciate that he did, because I think that this was something that was meaningful to so many people. Every detail, every moment of religious symbolism was carefully considered by the Queen and her closest aides during the later years of her life. Her Majesty's state funeral was so God-honoring because that's exactly how she lived every moment of her life, a Buckingham Palace courtier said. The service was a celebration of her life, but also a true show of her commitment to God and to serving others. A minister who knew her added that she lived her life immersed in Scripture, and that she wanted people to feel that throughout the service. For a woman who had purposefully remained so shrouded in mystery during her life, the Queen's state funeral offered new glimpses into her personality, namely through music and readings. As these elements emphasized the things she respected and loved in her personal life, a rich inner existence that she mostly kept to herself. So there is a real beauty in the fact that at the last, the things that she was willing for us to see about her were the things that she really held most sacred and dear, and that was her relationship with the Lord. That funeral was like the preaching of the gospel. It was unbelievably beautiful. And it really, for anybody who thought that perhaps her relationship to God was sort of in name only, she went to church every Sunday because that's what one does, or that she was just a morally upright woman by white knuckling it. You really came to see through the funeral and through the revelation that she had planned so much of it, and had such a heavy hand in what her last words to us would be. It was so evident that her relationship with God was completely genuine and all-encompassing, and that the decency and the upright morality that we saw wasn't because she was just born like that or that's just her culture, but because she held herself to a certain standard helped by the Holy Spirit, and that she looked to God to help her to do her job well. And I think that if there is a delineation between her and her son, it's that he does not look at a relationship with God as something that will guide him to any effectiveness. I think that he looks at religion as this sort of thing that keeps a society on track generally. But he is often seen wanting to mix and mingle interdenominational religions for other services as a means of being inclusive. I think the problem with that is that when you do that, you just expose your lack of conviction about any one of those religions. And I think that the Queen was not keen to do that because in her mind, her convictions lay along a very certain religious trajectory. And to combine multiple religions with the effect of trying to be inclusive was to water down any number of the ones that you are including. So I think Charles is going to struggle, not because he doesn't have the ability to white knuckle it, but because he doesn't have the same guiding principles that his mother did. All right, well, we leave off of this by saying that the inside St. George's Chapel, as the Queen was finally laid to rest, in the King George VI Memorial Chapel, King Charles III wiped away his tears. In a 2011 speech at the Commonwealth Heads of the Government meeting in Australia, the Queen quoted an Aboriginal proverb: "We are all visitors at this time, this place. We are just passing through. Our purpose here is to observe, to learn, to grow, to love, and then to return home." Now resting by her strength and stay, Philip, her beloved parents, George VI and Elizabeth, and her sister Margaret, she too returned home. So I definitely skimmed that chapter real good because I really want to spend the majority of this episode talking about chapter 2. So chapter 2 is where he pulls off the gloves. He decides to become the most sour, dour individual one could encounter. It's really shocking how little he tried to seem fair. Look, here's the thing. I understand that we live in a generation right now where people are so self-involved that they think that as a journalist, your job is to tell everybody your truth. But what we end up getting is just a real catty blend of facts and your sad sack opinion. The thing that really was highlighted in this chapter was how much he disdains William. And I just don't know if he and I are consuming different news or if this is just his opinion. Or if there's just a certain set of people who really dislike William and what William stands for and who William is. But he goes to great lengths to talk about how William is basically just another man in gray, just this hard-headed, institutionalized guy who is going to charge right through any of the issues. He doesn't care about anybody's feelings. He doesn't care about his dad. He doesn't care about anything but rising to the top. It's I don't really know that much about William. I really don't. I think it's because he and Catherine are not in the media all that much, at least not in the American media. It may be that in Britain he's covered constantly, but in America he's not really talked about all that much except for in glowing terms. So this real negative spin that Omid Scobie wants to put forth in this chapter is real foreign to me. And I would say that it's foreign to most Americans who look at William and Catherine as beautiful, dignified, elegant, wanting to do the right thing. I don't know. You guys tell me what you think about this chapter, because I found myself infuriated for the majority of it. Like, infuriated. And most of it comes down to the fact that it was just so wildly unfair. But he starts out by quoting the Smiths, so you know we're in for it. He says, "The Queen is dead, boys, and it's so lonely on a limb." Well, I knew when I read that it was going to be a real dramatic episode for us. Anybody who wants to quote the Smiths isn't in a good frame of mind. He starts out by saying that just hours after the Queen's death, Prince Charles, now King Charles III, ventured outside the gates of Buckingham Palace to shake hands with members of the public during his first walkabout as king. And that it was a stark contrast to the Queen, whose arm's-length approach might have seen her wave to well-wishers from the rope line, but rarely permitted her to indulge in anything more during her 70-year reign. But he says that Charles had probably planned this very moment to a T, and that what we saw was all just play acting, because, you know, Charles and his team had had years and years and years to orchestrate and plan this exact moment. At 74, Charles was the longest-serving heir apparent in the British monarchy's history. He had decades to think about and strategize for his time on the throne, time to outline his vision for the monarchy and calculate ways to delineate his reign from his mother's. And his vision is not a secret. He continually designed and refined it over the years, even publicly addressing it on many occasions. The king has stressed to aides that he wants his version of a, quote, modern monarchy to be more palatable to younger generations. Where his mother brought a brisk, stately detachment, Charles has spoken about wanting a warmer touch. Perhaps he learned some lessons from the late Princess Diana, queen of people's hearts, both in the tragedy of her life and in the genuine value of her work. Or maybe his vision has simply born of frustration from a life following the rules and abiding by the, quote, way things have always been. A rigid code for living and working as a royal that led to countless struggles with his family, the institution, and the public. Once again, he's just pulling out these old tropes about Diana, the queen of people's heart, and, you know, her life is nothing but tragedy, you know, punctuated by the genuine value of her work. I'm not saying that Diana didn't have genuine value. I'm not saying that people didn't like her. Obviously, both those things are true. But I don't think that Charles is trying to come up with a modern monarchy as a reply to people's love for Diana. I'm sure that he did look at the way people responded to her, and it would have been, you know, lessons well learned, if only from a media perspective, like how do I get people to respond to me the way they responded to her. But I also think that for a person who deeply wanted to marry Camilla and was told, no, you can't, you have to marry this virginal child, I think that probably there is a part of him that wants to buck this rigid code that kept him from happiness and, you know, one could argue plunged him into a world of despair as well by insisting that he marry this young girl. I think that it has been erroneously believed by most Americans that Diana had to be the bride because she was a virgin. And as it's been, as I've come to understand it, that wasn't even a thing. Her virginity had nothing to do with whether she could have children with Charles and marry Charles, because it's not like because she had a relationship with a boyfriend, you know, years before she married Charles, it's not like he was going to question his children's legitimacy. So, you know, I've never understood why they felt that they should throw her into the mix when they were very clearly so wrong for each other, or why people just pushed it so hard. I know that her family had ties to the royal family pretty extensively and had, even in her youth, lived on properties belonging to and adjacent to the palace. So I understand that she would have been a good person to put into his life because she understood the way things worked. So maybe they thought that that would be better than him just meeting some rando. But it just seemed doomed to fail. Anyway, regardless, whatever his life has shown him, he says he wanted something different, something more modern, something more palatable to the younger generations. I also wonder, too, if because he does have a lot of his own ideas and has, you know, through his 74 years, wanted to champion some of his own causes of interest, maybe it really chafed him that he would have to disassociate himself with those charitable causes once he became king. Of course, he had so many years to do it before he became king. It doesn't seem like it was going to be so much of a sacrifice. He could just pass the torch to younger generations. But I think he wanted his legacy to be one of caring for the environment and some of his other projects. I'm not sure what it is that instigated his desire for a more modern monarchy, but he definitely wanted things to be different. Omid Scobie argues that nothing's different. It's all just the same thing by another name, but you be the judge of that. As much as people embraced him at first, especially after coming out right after his mother died and shaking hands and everybody thinking, oh, he's going to start out so well, it was all destined to fail because they can only hide so long from their viciousness. And then it all becomes exposed because the truth of their hearts will be shown. Omid goes on to explain this time on November 29th, when Camilla was hosting a violence against women and girls reception at Buckingham Palace. And it was a high-profile effort for one of Camilla's cherished causes and an issue for which she advocated over the course of her royal tenure. It was declared a success by many who attended, and it was a reminder of what Camilla is capable of offering in her new role, and an event that signaled the firm had the ability to stick its neck out to advance a pertinent, substantial, and brave cause, even though they don't do it often enough. That's one of our first little backhands from Omid Scobie, the first of many. And, what is this business? They stick their neck out to advance a pertinent, substantial, and brave cause. All of their causes are pertinent and important. I mean, like some of the things they do are just, being part of society, like going and like cutting ribbons for a park or something. But this is hardly the first time they've ever advocated for something that is pertinent and substantive and brave. Has he ever met Princess Anne? Does he know what she's been up to her entire life? Why is he acting like, oh, finally somebody cares about abused women? Is that like one of the only causes that counts? And I've said this about Harry and Meghan too. They tend to think that the buzzword causes are the only ones that matter. But anytime you're helping anybody, that matters. It's just going to become very grating by how anytime they do anything good, he can't celebrate it. He can't be happy about it. He can't just leave it be. If he mentions it, he's got to immediately downgrade it. But this whole thing, this whole event, which should have gone off swimmingly, in which everybody else said was a success, was completely destroyed when an individual named Ngozi Fulani, a British citizen born in London, of African heritage and Caribbean descent, and CEO of Sussexes, a London-based charity that offers support to women and girls of African and Caribbean heritage affected by domestic and sexual abuse, noted that her experience was vastly different from the positive press surrounding it. Mixed feelings, she lamented on Twitter, revealing that within 10 minutes of arriving, a staff member she referred to as Lady S.H. had touched her dreadlocks without permission and persistently asked her where she was really from. The aide was Lady Susan Hussey, an 83-year-old lady-in-waiting from Queen Elizabeth II's reign, who had recently been moved into a non-salaried position of a lady of the household, a role that required her to attend Buckingham Palace engagements and mingle with guests. So, let me just say this real quick. This book, in the opening sentence, describing Ngozi Fulani, tells us that she is born in London, but is of African heritage and Caribbean descent. That's the opening sentence. So they already think that her heritage is important enough to mention. Not only is her heritage important to her, but it's important to the London-based charity that she was the CEO of, this Sussexes, which offers support to women and girls of African and Caribbean heritage affected by domestic violence. So, in the description of this woman, her heritage is of some importance. At least Omid Scobie believes that it is, and that he has to mention it to you. So, by this woman's own definition, by the way she would describe what she does, and in Omid Scobie's description of her, he's already mentioned that she's African and of Caribbean descent. So, let me just say that. All right, so the complaint is then detailed because God forbid she not jump on Twitter and just say that I've had mixed feelings because I was harassed at this event. She throws that out there. She wants everybody's attention about it. She wants everyone to rally around her and to care deeply about what she says was a super offensive situation. So in a transcript shared by Fulani, so she's putting all this out there. Nobody's forcing her to talk about this. She's putting all this out there. She detailed how Hussey had pestered her about her background and asked her at least 7 times where she was from. After Fulani told her she was British, Hussey pushed back with a follow-up question. No, where do your people come from? Even after she expressed exasperation and questioned the Queen's former confidant. My people? Lady, what is this? Hussey continued her offensive inquisition, exclaiming, Oh, I see, I'm going to have a challenge getting you to say where you're from. When did you first come here? Okay. I don't think any of you guys are going to be like, which way is she going to go? Who is she going to side with here? Not Fulani. I just can't even believe that you'd be this offended by somebody asking you where you're from. When in the definition of your own organization, you say that it's for people of African and Caribbean descent. Obviously, your race matters to you. So why would you be offended by somebody showing interest in you? Your charity is based on helping people from the same countries you hail from or that your descendants are from. It's not for London women who have been abused. It's for women of the same race and descent as yourself. So that must matter to you. And because that must matter to you, since you're here at this event under that banner, what is the offense of Lady Susan Hussey saying, so where are you from? Where are your people from? Wanting to show a genuine interest in you. Since when was that like a really offensive thing? Also, I've never understood why it was so offensive for people to notice or mention your hair. Now, a person could say, I didn't really like it when she touched my hair just because like personal space. It's like sometimes people can get a little close, but sometimes older people do stand close to you and are a little bit in your space because they can't hear you. So just be gracious, be kind. And I don't know what the whole situation with the dreadlocks is. Is it possible that she was saying, I like your hair, it's really pretty, and then, reached out to touch it? Like, I just, to me, it's like, to decide that that's a microaggression that you're going to get your panties in a water about and you're going to run home and you'll be like, mixed feelings on Twitter. That's your own fault. If you had a bad time because you were so busy in your own head, you're so self-centered that you decided to make this lady's inquiry about you because she's trying to be interested in you, because she's trying to carry on a conversation with you. She doesn't know you. What is she going to talk to you about? She's trying to start a dialogue with you. She's trying to start a conversation. And you clearly think that your race is important because you set your charity up with those parameters. I just don't understand how now it's offensive that somebody's noticing. Okay, well, Scobie wants to say that this awkward and shocking conversation witnessed by the leader of the British Women's Equality Party, Mandu Reid, amounted to a privileged white aristocrat berating a black woman about her origins while refusing to believe she was only a British citizen. Of course she was accepting she was a British citizen, but she obviously is not from England. Do we need a history lesson? Obviously, she's not from England. So nobody's saying that, you're here illegally, we need to call up some authorities and have you deported. She was asking, where are you from? This book goes on to say that Hussey's casual racism, be it conscious or not only scuttled Camilla's successful event, shifting the focus from a noble cause to controversy, it also came at a time when the royal family was still digging out from Harry and Meghan's revelation in their March 2021 Oprah interview that concerns and conversations were had in the family about how dark the skin of their unborn Archie might be. Y'all know how I feel about this. Don't come at me telling me that conversation was racist. It was not racist. Okay, you guys, this is beyond the beyonds. Hussey is not a member of the royal family. She might be good friends with the royal family, but her decisions have nothing to do with what Charles would do, with what Camilla would do, with what William would do. There's really just no reason to be so offended by this whole scenario. First of all, it's not an offensive scenario. But secondly, to just play into and be like, racism. Okay, well, then that's sad if you would go through life looking at a situation like this as racism, because you're going to have a very hard time walking down the street and not encountering racism. The book goes on to say that Hussey's episode marred an otherwise meaningful royal engagement. And Fulani says that standing there in a room packed with people while this violation was taking place was so strange, especially as the event was about violence against women. She says, that feeling of not knowing what to do will never leave me. Almost alone in a room full of advocates. Well, you didn't know what to do. Why don't you just answer the question? Why did she double down? Why did she decide that she was going to not allow the conversation to move forward. She wanted to sit in that situation and marinate in it. She wanted to make it worse. She wanted to get Susan Hussey to ask her over and over again so that she could say, she asked me 7 times. You made her because you wouldn't just answer the damn question. Where are you from? Oh, I'm from the Caribbean. Oh, what part? Well, my people are from blah, blah, blah. And then you could have just moved on. If this was so uncomfortable for you, why didn't you move the conversation along? Did your brain just stop working? Answer the question and move on if you really hate the question. But more importantly, why would you hate that question? Why would you look at that as offensive? How does this person go through life? If that would be an offensive question, what isn't an offensive question? I mean, really, truly, what the hell is this madness? That the whole world was talking about this too. And that's my next criticism. Why in the world did anybody in their right mind give this any play whatsoever? And the first group I would look to as having failed on this is the palace. The fact that they even let this narrative be something that they would come out and apologize for is ridiculous. This is the problem. Nobody has a moral backbone. And nobody has any convictions. Everybody's waiting for the green light from everybody else. It's like, everybody's like, oh, wait, what's the temperature? What's the room say? What do I need to then say? Oh, we're deciding this is offensive now? Okay. I'm offended too. It was racism. Okay. It's not racist to ask somebody where they're from. It is one of the greatest compliments that you could pay somebody that you care enough to hear the answer. And for the palace to then, come up, wringing their hands, oh, we're really sorry. This is really bad. We're really sorry. We've talked to her. She's out of the position. We don't want to, we're not going to let her be in that position anymore. We just had no idea that something so awkward and terrible was going to take place. We would never have allowed this to happen to anybody. You should have just said, we stand by Lady Susan Hussey, who has always been a devoted member of our staff and a friend to our family, knowing that she did not mean anything racist by that. And it's unfortunate that other people would paint this wonderful lady in such a ugly light. She's always been a benefit to our family, and we are going to stand by her in the event of these really ugly allegations that do not paint an honest picture. And that's what they should have said. But instead, they let the situation boil up and boil up and boil up because they took a knee to the crowd. They said, oh, are you mad at us? Beat us harder, Oh, we didn't mean it, but okay, since you say that's what we meant, all right. If you didn't mean it and the lady wasn't being racist, then don't throw her under the bus and say, oh, if something racist must have happened since this person decided that it did. Well, did the feelings matter of Lady Susan Hussey? She didn't think it was racist. So since one person thinks it is. What about the opinions of the other person? Why does the white person's feelings not matter, but the person of darker skin, their feelings matter? Look, everybody's feelings matter. One person's feelings over the other, everybody can say their piece. Why was Lady Susan Hussey silenced? And why did everybody act like she had committed this big crime? I think at this, with this vantage point and this distance, is there anybody here who would now look at that and be like, yeah, that's pretty bad. She was just a really terrible racist old lady. I don't think so. But the palace wanted, they said, hey, we're really sorry this happened. They said it's unacceptable and it's deeply regrettable. And that they said, we have reached out to Ngozi Fulani on this matter and are inviting her to discuss all elements of her experience in person if she wishes. It went on to say that Hussey has stepped aside from her honorary role with immediate effect. The palace also failed to explain why Lady Susan had been put in such a role in the first place. An octogenarian and trusted advisor to the Queen, Hussey might have had respect from the family members, but it was unwise to put her in a public-facing position at an event with such a diverse crowd at a time when they needed to show some proof of modernization. What? So just because she's old, she has no right to be out in public? There's no way that that's an argument. She's an octogenarian. How dare she be there? This is supposed to be a diverse situation. Okay, well, is age not a diversifying factor? What? I'm so sickened by this. Well, now we get to the one point that Omid, Scobie, and I agree on. He says that the press offices in both royal households should be pumping out good news about the family, not countering allegations from their back foot and expending resources apologizing, fixing, and tap dancing around scandals. Yeah, I agree, but I think we agree from different directions. I agree that they need to quit highlighting these things that are negative. And they need to stop being silent when like true things have really happened. Like with the whole Harry and Meghan thing. Come out already and say your position here instead of always being silent about everything. But more importantly, when somebody wants to call you out, the first thing you don't do is apologize, because that's never going to be good enough. Never apologize to the mob. Ever. For any reason, apologize to the mob. Ever. Because they're just a bunch of bored people with nothing to do. So to placate them by saying, we're really sorry, says I am guilty of it. If you're not guilty of it, don't say you're sorry for it. Hello? Tell the truth. Tell the truth. It's not telling the truth to apologize for something you didn't do. So don't ever, 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 for any reason, say you're sorry for anything you didn't do. Even if somebody's super angry at you and the only way to get them out of your face is to say sorry. Then just let them scream themselves hoarse. Don't say anything. Don't agree with it. We continue on to the issue of the king. All right. So his reign has already been marred by the fact that he has people within his family and in his inner circle who are racist. Scobie goes on to say that the king should be prepared for a reign under a microscope. The press, at least those who aren't in his pocket, the public and his foes, will quickly and mercilessly critique everything he does, and they will be unsparing in their judgment because of her long service and her beloved stature in the nation pantheon. Queen Elizabeth II was often spared this treatment, but Charles gets no such grace. Now, here's William's response to the whole thing, and I think he too made a mistake here. Despite the fact that Hussey is his godmother, Prince William was fast to denounce and remove himself from the ugly ordeal. Behind the scenes, William was furious and told his team that he needed to distance himself quickly. There was just this feeling that it would have been easily avoided, said a source in his circle. William asked, why was she there in the first place? Acting the same day the news broke, Kensington Palace spokesperson Lee Thompson, who had taken on the job 5 months earlier, said, this is a matter for Buckingham Palace, but as the Prince of Wales spokesperson, I appreciate that you'll want to ask about it. So let me address this head on. I was really disappointed to hear about the guest experience at Buckingham Palace last night. He went on to say, racism has no place in our society. The comments were unacceptable, and it's right that the individual has stepped aside. This was a swift rebuke and a remarkably different PR response to what we've come to expect from the palace. William's decisive action, as the matter demonstrates that he is willing to act independently and, added a source, is proof that he is unwilling to dither and defer to Buckingham Palace when a situation demands an immediate, resolute response. As the heir to the throne, he's savvy enough to know that there are moments he can leverage to show the public and the institution that he's his own man, and one ready to be king. His father, said sources, didn't share the same approach. It was a rash, knee-jerk response, a Buckingham Palace source remarked. The feeling was they wanted to disassociate instead of thinking as a team. Okay. What we will see in this chapter is that William's instincts are very different from the instincts of his father, if any of this is to be believed. And I think that because he's younger, he probably has his finger a bit more on the pulse of what people and what this generation is looking for from the institution. And I'm sure that in that moment he thought, look, let's not stand around. People are upset. Let's throw them an apology and move on. Let's say, hey, yeah, we acknowledge that person's feelings were hurt and we don't stand behind racism. But I think that they could have said that. Even that, I think, is a bridge too far, but fine, whatever. You got to say something. But then to say the remarks were really terrible and horrible and we've removed the person who said them, that's unfair. They weren't. Are we never going to examine people's motivation for what they said or why they said it? We're just going to denounce it. Were any of us there? And I suppose if you're going to make that argument, Fulani could say, yeah, well, you weren't there, so you don't know how she said it. You don't know how it made me feel. I guess what I'm saying is, just from an outsider's perspective, I hear this conversation, even from the telling of Fulani, who would insist that this was a really terrible situation that had happened. I don't find that even she, in her retelling of it, is able to convince me that it was super offensive. And it just seems like, for a person who has really been hurt and offended, it just seems very self-centered to get on Twitter. If you've been hurt and offended, why don't you talk to people in your actual circle of friends? Why do you need the whole world to know about it unless you're looking for retribution? And if you are so power hungry that one incident that you're really stretching it to try to bring somebody down. You're so power hungry that you would be looking to down an institution on this really manipulated story. it just doesn't speak well for you. And I think a lot of people reacted pretty negatively to it. I think there was a good deal of people who thought, oh yeah, she's really been harmed. But then I think that there was a lot of people who thought, I don't know, that doesn't really seem like it's that big a deal. Okay, but the book goes on to use that example as a springboard for talking about the way William responds to things and the way that Charles responds to things. Starting with the whole response to Prince Andrew and all of his scandals. The palace aides told members of the press that Prince William and his father were in lockstep over the action to take away Andrew's titles and military honors, a buzzword that then rippled through the media, and one that the palace used to suggest that Charles and his son were joined forces to support Queen Elizabeth II at the tail end of her reign. It's a nice story, but behind the scenes a different one played out. Knowing the Queen's soft spot for Andrew and his father's fear of hurting his brother, sources say that it was actually William who encouraged the Queen and Charles to strip the disgraced Duke of York. William stepped up, but those close to the Queen briefed journalists that it was very much a joined father-son move. That's where the term lockstep came in. And a source close to William. Regardless of the details, it worked out, but it took so long to coordinate necessary action, it also came at great cost. The bad press was relentless. Okay, I just feel like he's making a mountain out of a molehill about this term lockstep, because somebody in the group, of course, had to put forth the idea that, okay, we need to strip his titles, and this is why. And then after that, people will be like, you know what, you're right. Good argument, let's go with that plan. Now, it is possible, too, that the Queen and Charles just didn't have their finger on the pulse of people's agitation and irritation about the Epstein scandal, which was going to bleed all over Andrew. People were furious about Epstein. Furious. And all you need is an internet connection to know how people feel about Epstein and what felt like a giant cover-up by the elites. So for William to say, hey, we really need to show that we do not stand with Andrew after his connection to that guy, it doesn't surprise me that he would have a better feel for that. He is younger. And it was on all the podcasts and all the, internet chatter about Epstein. If William is at touch at all with the rest of the world, which I assume that he is, he would know. Whereas I don't know that Charles is listening to any podcasts. I don't know that Queen Elizabeth is, I don't know that Queen Elizabeth was checking Twitter, So it doesn't surprise me that William would say, hey, I think this is the direction we should go in. And once he'd said it, then they could have genuinely been in lockstep. Just because they didn't simultaneously have the same idea at the same time doesn't make it disingenuous to describe them as being in lockstep. All right, well, the book goes on to say that the prince, said an insider, knows his father's reign is little more than transitional, if only by virtue of the king's age, and is acting accordingly. There was rarely a moment where Charles stepped on his mother's toes. But it's different with William. He's eager to establish himself as his own man. He's not giving his father the same space that Charles did with the Queen. There's no time for that. But I also think it's true enough to say that his father is not Queen Elizabeth. The relationship would be completely different. His mother demanded that kind of respect just by the way that she carried herself. Whereas Charles, I think, has not always carried himself with that same regality. So if William has a different relationship with his father, it's because his father's a different sort of person than his grandmother was. And I do think that William is just not one for the drama. And I think that the drama that surrounded his father and the drama that surrounds his brother and the drama that surrounded his uncle is distasteful to him. And if there is a sense of frustration that his name is attached to a group of people whose scandals are always things he's having to shake off, I don't blame him. The book says that behind closed doors, the King and the Prince of Wales are embracing very different approaches to the modernization of the monarchy. For William, this isn't just about ego, claimed a source. Rather, it's because the institution itself has always put its weight behind him, giving the prince the confidence required to stand apart from his father. The book goes on to say that William is constantly giving the highlights in various public events, whereas Charles continues to just sort of be a footnote in the family story. He gives the example that in June 2022's Platinum Jubilee concert, William had the biggest moment during the televised event in addressing the public and promoting his own efforts on finding solutions to environmental issues. Charles, of course, is probably annoyed by that because the environment has always been his issue. And he didn't really have anything to do except announce a sketch starring the late monarch and Paddington Bear, which, let's be honest, would anybody want that part of the show? Probably not. And then, of course, there was another tussle for the spotlight when William chose to sit down for a rare interview with the Sunday Times, scheduled for publication the day after King Charles first trooping the color parade, essentially wiping out any coverage of that special moment from the front pages. I don't mean to show my gaping ignorance, which is quite extensive, but don't they do the trooping of the color like every time you turn around? So it's not like there's not going to be another time for that. And for William to sit down and have an interview with the Sunday Times, I don't think he was like trying to wipe his dad off the pages. It's just that there's going to be another trooping the color, like in about 5 minutes. I just feel like every time I turn around, they're doing another one of those. Anyway, the book says that William represents the monarchy's true next stage, and Charles is just a bridge to get there. We get it. You've said that about 1,000 times in 1,000 different ways, Scobie. All right. William's the future. Charles is the bridge. We get it. We get it. We get it. He goes on to say that the prince's unilateral response notwithstanding, the timing of the Hussey controversy couldn't have been worse for William and Kate. The story broke out on the morning that the Waleses were preparing to leave for the United States to roll out the green carpet for the Earthshot prize ceremony in Boston. Oh, man. Okay, so now we're going to get to the part of the chapter where he goes to great lengths to let you know that William and Catherine just can't seem to put a foot right. You know, all their, little glitz and glamour comes to naught because all their causes are stupid and lame, and everyone thinks they're boring. So. And I'm just over here like, am I watching different news than you? Because I do not remember this event being some kind of big, embarrassing faux pas for them. That they would show up here and that everyone was like, crickets, no one cares. After William Wadley announced Earthshot to the world, sources claim Charles was quietly annoyed. For much of his adult life, he was the one who passionately pushed the environmental cause, often without any acknowledgement. He had hoped that William would want to involve his father or at least credit him for inspiring him to take on this role, but instead, it was as if Charles' environmentalism didn't even exist, said a Clarence House source at the time. A glitzy affair for a good cause, the inaugural Earthshot ceremony in London generated a fair share of buzz. The following year's event was shaping up to be no different, featuring celebrity guests. But by the time they landed in Boston, the furor over Lady Susan was at full volume, drowning out much of the hoopla for the event. The couple flew commercial to make a point, but it was lost on the public already outraged by yet another royal race incident. Who is this public that they're referring to who is outraged? I'm part of the public. I wasn't outraged. I was super excited when William and Kate came. I mean, I guess super excited is a little bit of an overstatement. I wasn't going to see them. But I thought it was nice that they came to the country, and it's interesting to see what she's going to wear. And, everybody likes it when they come. Everyone. There's no American out there that was like, not those ratty racists. We got our own problems with race. We don't need their problems too. Nobody thought that. And I just think that this is how people feel about William and Catherine in America. They either don't care because it's not our royals, or they think they're a nice couple. That's it. I don't think that there's not like one person over here harboring great disdain. But Scobie says that important people such as John Kerry and Carolyn Kennedy appeared to tap the brakes on joining the engagement since they didn't want to have to sit around with a bunch of racists. Kerry cited illness and Kennedy said that she had disrupted travel plans. But in reality, it's likely they both wanted to see how the scandal would play out. Of course, in the end, Kerry did attend the event, and Prince William later met with Kennedy for 30 minutes. On the second night, William and Kate attended a Celtics basketball game, where, to their surprise, many fans booed and subjected the royal couple to chants of USA, USA, whenever they appeared on the Jumbotron. Really? Well, at least Scobie says that in all fairness, Boston sports fans will boo just about anyone who shows up on their turf, but the latest scandal, along with all the other baggage William and Kate drag around as royals, including their treatment of Harry and Meghan for one, only made the jeers louder. In fact, there appeared to be little excitement for the royal visit in general, especially compared to the huge cheers I witnessed when traveling with the couple to New York in 2014. When asked what it was like having the royals courtside, Celtics coach Joe Mazzulla reportedly said, "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph?" before joking that he was familiar with only one royal family and didn't know too much about the British one. Thank you. All right, well, to cite Joe Mazzulla as, the voice of America is to be way off. Joe's always saying things that are sort of like very original to him. I think he's really funny. I always enjoy when he is being interviewed, but he doesn't say things that are necessarily descriptive of how everybody feels. That is that was why that was such a soundbite, because that was such a random thing to say. And, it's just him. It's his personality. It's his sense of humor. But to make matters worse, there was a halftime show entertainment courtesy of another royal couple. The first trailer for the Sussexes' intimate Netflix docuseries, Harry and Meghan, released that same day, an international move by the streamer, I'm told, promising the, quote, full truth behind the couple's departure. There's a hierarchy of the family, Harry said in a clip. There's leaking, but there's also planting of stories. It was all anyone could talk about. But isn't that ironic that Harry would say that in the clip, that there's planting of stories, when the docuseries was first advertised the same week that his brother and his brother's wife were in the country? It just seems to me that how in the world can you point a finger and be like, the institution is just riddled with all sorts of planning and scheming, when he himself, in this very move, is very evidently planning and scheming against his own brother. But what of the Earthshot ceremonies? How did that actually work out? He says that in the United Kingdom, newspapers claim that the public switched off in droves within minutes of the BBC airing it, while the audience watched live in the United States via PBS streaming platform, and it fell to hundreds at times. And it was a bad look because certain celebrities flew in on private jets, David Beckham being one of them, and that the people receiving the environmental awards were left to stay at home, and they just appeared on Zoom, which is kind of a bad look. Then he wants to say that rather than buying a new outfit, Kate made a statement by renting her off-the-shoulder gown. Genuinely good idea, but she's never done it again. So, what does it matter that she did something good one time? Of all the people he could criticize about their wardrobe and being more financially conscious about spending money on clothes, Catherine is not the one to come after, because she has repeatedly had outfits and dresses remade so she could wear them again for other events. That's a well-known thing about her. And she is never trying to upstage anybody in her dress. If she goes to somebody's wedding, she always wears something she's worn before, so no one's paying any attention to her. And for him to act like this is a one-off, but she's generally just spending like a drunken sailor, what in the world? He also wants to criticize the fact that the green carpet that they walked on was reused from the previous year. But, don't be too excited about that environmental do-goodery, because they shipped that green carpet all the way from England. So that probably cost a lot of money. Then he says that after this whole debacle, for the first time in their lives, William and Kate now had to deal with image challenges of their own. What is he talking about? So he wants to tell me that Catherine never had any bad press when she was dating William? Everyone's calling her Weighty Katie and making fun of her and acting like she's this clingers-on, which of course she wasn't. But for him to act like this is the first time anyone has ever criticized them for everything, and then he goes on to paint this really ridiculous picture of the both of them that, she's just this popular fairy tale figure. Everybody just likes her because she's just like this, poor little Cinderella character who came from obscurity and married a prince. And that William, up until this point, has always seemed like this, aware and vigorous young guy who is just going to really inject new life into this stodgy institution he's a part of. But that now everyone's realizing that maybe they're not so exciting after all, and that the Waleses are finally facing more scrutiny from sections of the press and public, now unleashed from their respectful relationship with the Queen. So William and Catherine should expect everyone to turn on them, because that's basically what they deserve. They're just the same thing as everybody else in the institution. They've just been able to manage to hide it longer. In case you aren't done with this guy's sour attitude yet, he's about to stick a whole lemon in your mouth. You know what Omid Scobie is? He is the human equivalent of stepping on a Lego in the dark. He's just so maddening. He is without equal. He goes on to say that it's not like things were going that well for the firm before the Queen's death. That's literally a sentence. The cattiness is literally there. He has italicized the word that. So you're literally supposed to read it like this. It's not like things were going that well for the firm before the Queen's death. After Harry and Meghan shared stories of problematic behavior and made some damning allegations, and Prince Andrew's slow-motion fall from grace plunged the family into turmoil, the palace was in frazzled damage control mode, and Charles, thanks to his plethora of money-related scandals, Scobie's never going to explain what that means, and doing little right, even for the usually unscathed William and Kate, their disastrous 8-day Caribbean tour through Commonwealth countries, Jamaica, Belize, and the Bahamas, in late January 2022 for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, put them firmly in the firing line. What should have been a simple smile-for-the-camera trip turned into a PR nightmare for Kensington Palace, and instead of solidifying the monarchy's presence in the Commonwealth realms, the tour ended up raising new questions about its future. So then we got to get into the dregs of this conversation. Look, I think that it is true that this Caribbean tour was not met with a lot of understanding. I think that it was just a really bad time for them to take that trip, just because the public conversation, since we can't have individual personalities anymore, and we're just this mask that goes around like a hive, all bleeding out the same phrases. We were all talking about racism at the same time, and we were all talking about colonialism at the same time. So for them to go to these former colonies and take pictures with these people who clearly did not want them to be there, it was a bad look, but one that they weren't prepped for, and one that William apparently was very upset that they weren't better prepped for. Apparently, before they even got there, there had been protestations about their visit. They were really walked into the line of fire without any kind of a shield. Scobie says that prior to the visit, there was a publication written by the Advocates Network, which was addressed to the royal family and said, "During her 70 years on the throne, your grandmother has done nothing to redress and atone for the suffering of our ancestors that took place during her reign and or during the entire period of British trafficking of Africans, enslavement, indentureship, and colonialization. We encourage you to act accordingly and just say you're sorry." The letter continued and called for reparations. So that was the kind of situation they were walking into, and it seems strange to me that they could be walking into such a hot zone of distrust and not be properly prepared. And I've said this in other books I've read as well. I think that the palace doesn't do a very good job testing the temperature, which they could easily do by just reading Twitter a little more often than they do. I think that I don't know exactly how they plan for these events, but I got this feeling when I was reading Tom Bower's book too, that there's a lot of times they walk into things where it's like, but you could have figured this out before, and so I do agree with Omid that sometimes it feels like they're on their back foot. I don't think that they are very good at predicting the temperature. So I'm not saying they actually have to change anything they're doing. I'm just saying that they need to be aware that people have their problems. Instead of just being like, I think people have problems. Okay, but figure out what the problem is and then address it appropriately. But one thing you never have to do is acquiesce to the accusations. So I'm not saying become aware of the accusations so that you can apologize for them, but rather become aware of the allegation so that you can then carry yourself in a way that makes that allegation no longer true, right? Don't apologize for it, but just, if there's any truth to it, then take the truth on and change things. But if there's no truth to it, then prove that there's no truth to it through your actions. And maybe even come out and be like, that's bogus. Sometimes I think that never explain, never complain only works when there is no internet involvement. But then when the internet is involved and the media has become so loud, I just think that that's no longer a strategy that will work in this day and age. Okay, well, the book goes on to say that instead of acknowledging the grievances, William and the palace chose to ignore it all. He says, "I was just one of the few journalists who initially challenged the silence, pointing out the arrogance of flying into a country that had been colonized by Britain and the royal family, yet again refusing to engage in conversation about it." Photos of William and Kate in Trench Town, clutching the hands of young black boys and girls through a fence that bore an unfortunate likeness to a cage, set the tone for the rest of the trip. At best, it was an unfortunate snapshot. At its worst, it was proof that all the white and undiverse palace team was just not equipped to carry out such engagements. "I will never get behind any human being who wants to point out somebody's flaw, starting with the fact that they are white. You've lost me on that. You've lost me. You are racist. If you are going to use somebody's color against them in any conceivable way, you've lost the argument. You don't have one. If you did, and that's your best point, sit down." The book goes on to say the Kensington Palace explained themselves by saying that if you had been there, it wouldn't have been as obvious that this was an entirely inappropriate visual to be sending out to the world in regards to that photograph. Said the couple wanted to meet as many people as possible and not ignore anybody. And of course, Omid wants to interject himself and says that he suggested that it would have been avoided entirely if the couple's team included people of color, or those with more sensitivity to what would be appropriate and what wouldn't. "Maybe," they replied quietly. See, that doesn't work though, because nobody knows who the team is that is behind William and Kate. They're the faces front and center. They can't change the color of their skin. So just because they had somebody with darker skin talking to them about what they should or shouldn't do, is that really going to change anything? This was the trip that they had agreed to take. It's not like they just showed up and there was no agenda. This trip had been planned. There had been people who had gone on before. The book says that the trip was organized months in advance, and all movements were determined by an earlier reconnaissance visit, led by members of William's team in the British Foreign Office. Even though the whole scene was drawn up and presented to the palace officials and the couple, no one found that the staging of the pair standing in an old Land Rover to recreate imagery of colonial-era trips made by the Queen and Prince Philip was a bad idea. The move, which saw the couple in all white on a raised platform waving at the all-black crowds below, was greeted with horror and widely mocked. Only after the world reacted to the photos did those around the couple attempt to distance themselves from the decision. There were questions, including from William, about whether it was appropriate, admitted a Kensington Palace source. The staging was all at the request of the Jamaican government, not the palace. They were keen to include the Land Rover, which had been kept for moments like this, but absolutely, we should have pushed back. Omid says that a spokesperson at the office of the Prime Minister in Jamaica said that that story doesn't sound true to them. I'm like, was it a spokesperson or an intern? Because somebody would have an answer for that. But Kensington Palace says that they were just excited about the itinerary initially and that there were no complaints and no hesitation. Well, you know what I think? I think that William having hesitations about whether this was appropriate, that rings true to me. Because if any of this is to be believed, he is the one who seems to have some idea about what the public wants from them. And he seems to have some idea of what would and would not be appropriate. See, this is what I'm saying when I said, you don't need to apologize for things, but you need to make sure that your behavior does not indict you. If prior to their visit you have people writing open letters about how you and your compatriots have spend time colonializing and enslaving them, maybe you don't come and stage a picture that makes you look like a colonizer. Because you aren't one. They're part of the Commonwealth now. It's not a colony anymore. So to ever get yourself in a situation where you are dressing up as the very thing they accused you of, that's bad. And yeah, there definitely should have been pushback. Just because somebody's like, well, we have this old car we'd like you to use. Okay, well, that's not good enough. Because there's a letter right over here that people are screaming about the former colonization. So let's not act like we are looking back on the old days. Then they are met with the horrific manners of this individual named Andrew Holness, who was Jamaica's prime minister. And he, to their very faces, said that Jamaica was moving on and ready to remove the Queen as head of state. And William and Catherine couldn't do anything but stand there awkwardly and say little in response. But later that evening, William said that he was frustrated and irritated that he'd been so unprepared for the moment. So far, everything about the trip looked like a throwback to a bygone era of the British Empire. Had this have been a personal tour, the itinerary would have been different. But this was a trip for the Platinum Jubilee, and we had little to say in how it looked, said Kensington Palace. So, I mean, the whole thing, I'm not going to stand by here and be like, well, nobody should have been offended by this. I don't think people should have been offended, but I do think that the palace messed up in the fact that people are already angry about a thing, so don't play into their anger. Avoid it, because then it's just going to be all these people being like, see, we told you, look at them standing in their white in that Land Rover, look at them. Well, to wrap up their Caribbean visit, William released a statement after coming home and realizing that things had gone very poorly in the estimation of the world. He said, you learn so much on foreign visits. I know, he added, that this tour has brought into even sharper focus questions about the past and the future. In Belize, Jamaica, and the Bahamas, the future is for the people to decide upon. His words certainly cooled some of the coverage, but it was too late to save it. This tour was already marred by ignorant slip-ups, mistakes, and indelible images that those in the Commonwealth still haven't forgotten, as many realms continue to power forth with their plans for true independence. What I don't understand, though, is why William is receiving so much of the backlash, because he didn't plan the trip. He wasn't over here deciding that he was going to stand in that Jeep. He wasn't over here saying we're going to go visit these people and those people and that the setup is going to be where I'm having to meet them from behind a fence. That wasn't his plan. Why isn't anybody mad at the Jamaican government who was working hand in glove with the British for this entire itinerary? It isn't as though the British just showed up and said, this is what we're doing. They were working with people. So why aren't any of the people of those countries turning on their own government saying, why didn't you create a better spectacle for us? Why was this what you chose to do? Do you want to keep us enslaved? I mean, if they're so sure that colonization is the thing that the British are still just foaming at the mouth for, then why wouldn't they be mad at their government for letting the Brits come in and perpetuate this picture and this visual. Moving on. William's private secretary, Jean-Christophe Gray, said that moving forward, the heir and his wife planned to do things the Cambridge way, which included abandoning the never complain, never explain motto, favored by his father and grandmother. Aides also shared details about William's own plans to modernize how he works when he succeeds his father as the Prince of Wales. From the outset, it was claimed that he would have the estimated 137 staff that Charles employed to create a more effective and less formal team. It's not a criticism of how it was done in the past, a Kensington Palace aide told The Sun, which also reported that William wanted to rip up the Royal Institution's rulebook. But times are changing. Charles, however, finds this whole attitude to be disrespectful, and he says that William is out of order. The Duke of Cambridge screwed up, but he effectively leveraged the moment to tease the public that he would soon be able to bring change. As often envious of his own son's popularity and favored status in the institution as Prince Charles was, this was already a sensitive topic with him. So this breach in royal etiquette, which he has never spoken about directly with William, apparently left a mark. Well, the book goes on to talk about the fact that Charles can't manage his kids, and he never has been able to manage his kids. Not only is he frustrated with William, but he's also going to just botch everything with Harry, as we already know. The book says that a source close to William says that though Charles and William share a number of passions and interests, their style of leadership is quite different. An insider in Charles' camp explained, contrary to public belief, Charles leads with his head and his heart. William is colder in that respect. He just wants to get the job done, and he has no problem taking prisoners along the way. Explain yourself. What does that mean, he doesn't mind taking prisoners along the way? What prisoners? Over the years, William has often rejected his father's counsel, says the book, keen to avoid the controversial candidness for which Charles has a reputation. The king is a passionate idea man, whose instincts before he took the throne often drove him into political matters, his climate crusades, his eco-friendly initiatives, and his opposition stances on several government policies. But since his ascension, King Charles has at least proved more reserved than Prince Charles. But the question remains, will it last? Considering the ongoing drama in the firm, it seems unlikely that he'll be able to rise above it all for long. The new king is still dealing with the fallout from his inability to convene and command his own family. His ineptitude surrounding the Harry and Meghan saga has effectively turned the couple into the disruptors they were feared to become in the first place. And so much of it could have been prevented, said a mutual family friend. For so long, Harry has made it clear that he and Meghan simply wanted to be heard, that they wanted the opportunity to sit down and talk through the past from both perspectives and find a way to move forward. For Harry, it was about seeking accountability, and where appropriate, apologies. Stubborn as ever, it was the one thing Charles refused to give them, even if it meant risking damage to the crown. A former Clarence House staff member said Charles was encouraged by senior aides, and, on at least one occasion, the Queen herself, to swallow his pride. Just tell him what he needs to hear. That's what was said, admitted the former employee. Instead, Charles chose to say nothing and turned the other way as the Sussexes shared their story via Netflix in December 2022, and Harry's memoir a month later. A record-breaking global bestseller on its release day, Spare revealed the full, unvarnished story of the family's fractures. Unvarnished? By whose estimation? After watching so many others, including myself, tell their story, Harry quite rightly wanted his turn to put his own voice on the historical record. And that he did, describing decades of simmering resentment between his brother and the true depths of their falling out. Even more damaging to the firm were the revelations about how his family, including Camilla, had leaked personal details about his life to save their own skin. Despite the many opportunities to discuss his grievances ahead of the publication of the book, Charles instead chose to keep his distance for months. Harry and his father swapped a few words over Christmas 2022, but it wasn't until after the January 10th, 2023 release of the memoir that they had their first proper conversation. Encouraged by a close friend, the Duke of Sussex reached out to Charles by phone to try to discuss some of the unresolved issues between them. It was an awkward conversation, but he knew that if he didn't make those first steps, there would never be any progress, said a friend of the prince. There was no raised voices, no arguments, but the king was cold and brief rather than open to any proper dialogue. Well, how could you have a dialogue with a person who you know is in the midst of making Netflix documentaries and writing books about you? How can you sit down and have a conversation with a person like that? With no significant resolution or outcome from the father-son conversation, Charles had once again wasted an opportunity to take the upper hand and let bygones be bygones for the sake of the family harmony. What does that mean, bygones be bygones? What does that phrase mean? I mean, I hear that phrase, but I don't understand how it's applied here. Does that just mean saying, oh, Harry, whatever you say is true and I'll just apologize for it? No. It's complex, but there's increased frustration from some of the wider circle of family members that Charles won't just fix things for the sake of everyone, said a royal source. But fix it how? What does that mean? You have to give me some parameters. Didn't he try over and over and over with Harry and Meghan when they were here? But their demands were unruly. They can't just give in to this person's wild will. Just 3 months after the publication of Spare, the royal family's approval ratings fell to its lowest level in years, 47%, down 6 points since before the book's launch. In fact, several independent polls have shown that all senior royals have been affected by the fallout. Is he going to talk about Harry and Meghan's poll numbers? Because it's deplorable. The responses to claims by Harry and Meghan have followed a pattern of avoidance and dissembling. I've repeatedly witnessed up close how palace aides do their best to muddy the truths of the couple shared with the world, be it with misleading briefings to newspapers or in some cases lies to inquiring journalists. But the issues they raise, from institutional cruelty to unconscious racial bias, still loom large over the monarchy. None of this was helped by the fact that the Sussexes remain as much of the royal story today as the day they stepped back from their roles. For most royal correspondents, the couple are still the only surefire way to get prominent headlines and online traffic, whether it was the months of will they won't they stories about the couple attending the coronation, or the breathless running commentary about the state of their various business deals in the United States. Instead of completely walking away from the firm, they've unintentionally taken much of the royal spotlight with them to America. Unintentionally? I think that was their clear intention when they refused to give up their titles. Determined to live their lives apart from the royal apparatus, they have managed to make their own way, enjoying a reasonable amount of support and experiencing some missteps and failures, all on their own terms. A reasonable amount of support? What is he talking about? Experiencing some missteps and failures, misstep off a cliff. This is beyond the beyonds. How is he going so easy on the two of them, yet going so hard on everybody else? If you're going to go hard on everyone. You know, why should we believe any of this when the public's experience of everything you're talking about is so vastly different from what you're trying to say happened? This is bad. This is bad writing. This is terrible. I'm really struggling to get through this, you guys, if you haven't been able to tell. It goes on to say that now that Harry and Meghan have left, they've tried to put Edward and his wife Sophie sort of in place and sort of wedge them into where Harry and Meghan used to be, but it hasn't gone well, mostly because Sophie's the worst, according to Omid Scobie, and she's the worst because she didn't know who Oprah was. So you can see she doesn't care about black people. What? At some point, Sophie had said, Oprah who? When somebody was speaking about Oprah. And that she had said, well, if you're not into chat shows, there's no reason why you should know who she is. Certainly not in this country anyway. And everyone wanted to flip out and be like, she doesn't care about one of the most prominent black women in American television. No, she doesn't, because it doesn't pertain to her. She doesn't watch chat shows. She's not from America. But I think the other thing that is really disingenuous about this is that even in the Harry and Meghan documentary, Harry also was unimpressed by Oprah initially, because he's like, yeah, you were really interested in Oprah, Meghan. You were really excited about that. I mean, I don't know if many of the rest of us really cared when she showed up at Kensington Palace wanting to have an interview, but you really cared. And Meghan's like, yeah, well, it's Oprah. So even between the two of them, there was a real delineation between who thought Oprah was all that interesting or important. For Meghan, an American, and having grown up in Oprah's generation of power, she saw that as a real compliment. For Harry, what did he care? It wasn't that big of a deal to him. And of course, he goes on to feign interest as it goes on, realizing that in America, it's a big deal to be interviewed by Oprah. At least it used to be. But for Omid Scobie to really throw Sophie under the bus for not caring who Oprah is or not necessarily knowing who that is that a big deal? I don't know all the chat show people in British television. I don't know any of them. Would anybody be like, oh my goodness, look at her appalling racism. She doesn't know one of the black TV presenters in England? Well, if that's how you feel, sorry for you. We're going to finish up this chapter by him wanting to rope us right back into the conversation about Nagazi Fulani. And I thought we were done talking about that, but no. He wants his final words on this whole situation to be that the Nagazi Fulani and Lady Susan Hussey scandal is proof that a monarchy so defined by its own superior steadfast place in history lacks the agility and improvisational thinking to change with a rapidly transforming world. 17 days after the race scandal first made headlines, Fulani was finally invited to the Buckingham Palace to sit down with Hussey for a face-to-face conversation. The pair, I'm told, reluctantly agreed to allow palace officials to share a photo of their encounter with the media. According to a palace statement, the meeting was, quote, filled with warmth and understanding. Lady Susan offered her sincere apologies for the comments that were made and the distress they caused to Miss Fulani. Miss Fulani has accepted this apology and appreciates that no malice was intended. For the charity boss, who endured weeks of online trolling, violent threats, and defamatory remarks from radical right-wing media outlets, it all did little to heal her pain. And despite Buckingham Palace's claims that they too had apologized for the incident, Fulani revealed on March 8, 2023, that she never received a direct apology from the institution. But the institution didn't fail you. The person who you say offended you has sat with you and given you a face-to-face apology. So why does the institution as a whole need to apologize for the behavior of one person who did apologize to you? And the firm did organize a time for you to receive an apology. What more do you need? She says, if you're sorry, then tell me you're sorry, she said. I don't see why it's so hard to say I'm sorry. They did. That's why they arranged for you to sit down with Lady Susan Hussey, the lady who you said offended you. Oh my goodness. She says that if they could send her an invitation, then they know how to find her. So why is it so hard for them to say sorry? I'm not even following this line that I can't even follow her line of criticism here. You received an apology. You got it. What are you mad about? It says here that same day, International Women's Day, the activist announced that she would be stepping down from her charity due to safety concerns and continued harassment. Really? Okay. I mean, that if you're being harassed, potentially it's because you decided to make this a public conversation when you got on Twitter the night of the event and said, wasn't the best time I've ever had, and complained that somebody touched your dreadlocks and asked you where you were from. You invited the world to comment on it. So, maybe you're mad, but maybe you should be mad at yourself for taking a private situation to the public. If you're really mad that happened, you really felt injustice had been done, sure, reach out to the palace and say, I just want to let you know that there's a woman at your event who treated me in a way that I felt was really disrespectful. And it may behoove you not to have her around if she doesn't know how to behave according to present day cultural norms. But to get on Twitter and then be angry when people sounded off against you, you invited that criticism. You can't go into the public square and tell your story and then think that you're only going to receive one kind of feedback. You're inviting people from any angle to come in and say their piece about you. Regardless, it says here that Lady Susan returned to the royal fold, performing official duties on February 21st, attending a memorial service of a courtier on behalf of Princess Anne. In June, she was seen laughing and joking with Charles and Camilla in a monarch's box at the Royal Ascot, firmly back in the royals' inner circle. So, they obviously don't care that they have a racist in their midst. See, but that's the thing. That goes back to what I was saying. Don't apologize for the words that somebody said who had no intention of being racist. Because then when you do include her back in your fold, you've admitted that she's a racist. You've said she shouldn't have said that. They were incredibly offensive words. We can't believe she would do that. So now it does reflect poorly on you to have that person around. But if she's not a racist and you never believed she was, then you should have stood up for her in that moment. So that now when she's coming back around, you can boldly and freely have her around because she's not a racist. They're just continuing. They're kicking the can down the road by apologizing now because they're going to keep coming up against this issue with Lady Susan Hussey. I mean, does anybody really care what she's doing? No, it's just the naysayers, the whiners, and the complainers. But if you want to just weed out those annoying little voices that constantly keep coming back, don't give them anything to say. Shut them down. And that is our lesson for today. We're done with the chapter. Thank the Lord. Ironically, the next chapter is called, Oh God, I Hate This. And it's almost as though he can predict how we're feeling by this point. But the lesson from today is never apologize for something you didn't do. Even if the other person is in your face, screaming for you to apologize. If you did not do the wrong thing, don't you ever say sorry. Because you're admitting wrong where no wrong and no guilt exists. All right, that was a super long episode. I will be cutting this one up. So if you didn't get to the end of this, you won't know that I'm saying it. But anyway, I'm going to cut this one up so that if there's any part of this episode you want to go back and re-listen to, it won't be so hard for you to find it. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for attending with me as we read this book. I need you guys. This book isn't worst. I need you. We are going to continue to skim through this. Again, as I mentioned last time, we're going to be reading the Kennedy book this summer, but we're also going to be reading Tom Bauer's new book about the Beckhams as well. So that one's on order too. So I just want to get through this Omid Scobie. It's definitely one of those transitional books that we're just sort of reading until we come to some of the other books that will be out later this summer. But thank you guys so much for hanging out with me, and I will see you later. Bye.